We've come to discover the Newlay area of Horsforth and start at the canal bridge. Then in quick succession we cross the railway bridge and then the iron bridge over the river Aire. We then follow the river, going under the concrete ring road bridge to Calverley Lane. We cross the river again over the old Calverley Bridge and end at the railway pub, despite it being between the river and the canal. This was filmed in March 2015 and Geoff Druett is your guide.
Well now, technically speaking, at this point I'm not actually in Horsforth, this is Bramley, but then this whole area of Newlay has always been associated with Horsforth. Here of course, well, it's the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. This section between Leeds and Skipton was opened in 1777, although it took until 1816 for the full 127-mile route between Leeds and Liverpool to be fully open for navigation. But this canal, you know, it was the brainchild of a Horsforth lad, one John Stanhope. He had the whole route surveyed and prepared for building, and he chaired the very first meeting of the Canal Company in the Sun Inn in Bradford in 1766. Newlay was always an important industrial site, even before the canal was built. For example, stone from Bramley Falls Wood over here was used in the construction of Kirkstall Abbey. The pub here, by the way, the Abbey Inn, well, originally that was a farm, but it's been a pub since 1826. Well, just opposite here there was a tin church which was jointly administered by the parishes of Horsforth and Bramley, but unfortunately it burned down in 1906. But if you go on further down this lane, well, at one point there was a glue factory down here which used to boil down the carcasses of slaughtered animals. And slightly further on still, there was a steel factory which actually turned out tram wheels. Now that site was transformed in the First World War to a national shell factory, and during the course of the war it turned out 350,000 shell cases. Well, at one time, over 1,000 people worked in this part of Newlay. For example, where those houses stand now, well, there was once an enormous mill, the mill which produced the black dye for suit linings. Well, here, of course, we have the Aire Valley Railway line, and there was a Newlay station down here until 1965 when it was closed down by the dreaded Dr. Beeching. But this line was actually the first link between Bradford and Leeds, opened in 1846. Oh, and on this site here, there was another very smelly animal rendering plant. Well, this is Pollard Lane, which passes over the river Aire, and incidentally the midway line down the river marks the boundary between Bramley and Horsforth. But of course this beautiful cast iron bridge was built by John Pollard back in 1819, and it's believed it passes over the original old ford, and it might be that that ford is what it is that gives Horsforth its name. John Pollard recruited his money by charging a toll for crossing the bridge, and here we have the old toll house, and you actually paid your money here at this window here to apparently a very grumpy old woman. But that all came to an end when the bridge was closed to traffic in 1986. Well, just up from the bridge on the Horsforth side there were some rather grand villas, and they were built between 1860 and 1880, and the idea was to construct a splendid estate which would rival Crag Wood further up the river. But the problem was that the smells from all those animal rendering plants down there rather put people off. Well, as far as we can tell, this is the oldest house in Horsforth. It was built as a grange or a farm, and it belonged to the monks of Kirkstall Abbey, and it probably dates back to about 1154. But of course, as you can see, over the centuries there have been many additions and extensions. Until the 1930s, all the land around here was agricultural. But then, of course, when the railway came, they had to build this bridge to allow the farmer access to his fields on the other side. But when you look at the railway itself, you can see that the massive cutting here, that had been widened, and that happened in the 1890s to allow room for a second track to be laid. Well, now we're looking across the fields from Newlay to Rodley, and in the dip down there you can see what is now a nature reserve. And next to it is the site of the old crane works. That's all gone now. And then, of course, you follow on round the course of the canal to the Ring Road Bridge. Well, as you come over the brow of this little hill, it's a lovely surprise to see the path dropping away now down to the river as it curves away towards the ring road and the bridge. Well, this point here marks the furthest extent to what was once an old Leeds City Council tip. It closed down in the 1980s, and now it's well, it's a picnic site, but we haven't brought our sandwiches, so we'll keep on going. Well, this is the concrete road bridge which carries the ring road between Horsforth and Rodley over the River Aire. It was built in 1933, although they were talking about building it since the 1890s. And incidentally, it's the first concrete road bridge in the United Kingdom which was actually cast on site. I'm not sure that the efforts of the local graffiti artists add very much to the attraction, but when you look up as you walk through and under, it's still a pretty impressive structure. Well, the next bridge is not too far away. Not a road bridge this time, it's just for pedestrians. And it's your last chance to get across the river until the next footbridge, which is up at Cragwood in Rawdon, in about 1.5 miles from here. Well, this is one of my favourite bits of local architecture, Calverley Bridge. It was built in 1710 and paid for by the Stanhope family, who lived just up the road at Low Hall, and by the Calverley family from Calverley Hall. But before I go across the bridge, I'm just going to take a little diversion up here to see the railway bridge. Well, up here on the bridge you get rather a good view of the site of the old Calverley and Rodley station. Bit of a misnomer actually, because the station lay fully within the boundaries of Horsforth. But anyway, the big building, well, that's had many manifestations in recent years, but it was built as the Stanhope Hotel for thirsty travellers making their way to and from Leeds. Further down where the platform would have been, you can see the old station master's house. And cross the tracks, well, here there would have been a goods yard, but it's now, of course, the base for Woodland's joinery store. But come across the road and there you'll see the site of the old wooden ticket office, where you had to buy your tickets before you could get on the train in those days. And, well, it burnt down in 1966, and that really spelt the end of Calverley and Rodley station. But how things changed, because if you go across the other side of the bridge On the site of the old Clariant Sandoz chemical works, there's now a development of 500 new houses. But just beyond that, you can still find Low Hall, the old home of the Stanhope family. Well, after that little diversion, let's go back now to Calverley Bridge. Well, until the 1930s, when the road bridge was built, this was the only way to get across the River Aire. It was a typical packhorse bridge. You can see it wasn't very wide, but what made matters even worse for pedestrians was an iron gate which stood here, which you had to squeeze your way through with whatever bags you were carrying, and it was really very, very difficult, and it was a bone of real contention. Now, the only consolation, I suppose, was if you did cross Calverley Bridge, you didn't actually have to pay a toll. But even when you squeezed through the iron gate there, as you can see, it wasn't very wide for a horse and cart, and can you imagine what it must have been like in the early days of the motor car? Well, here at the Rodley end of Calverley Bridge, there was once a mill. The mill race actually is just down under here, but it's all totally blocked up now. Up on the banks of the canal, there was the Horsforth and Calverley gasworks. And when they came to clean this whole area up in 1990, it cost them £1 million. But going back to those days, before the road bridge was built up there, if you wanted to go to Calverley, well, there was nothing for it but to head on up these steps. But personally, I think I'm going to divert left to the pub.